Welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Church of Columbia video service, November 22nd, 2015. Together at the Table by Reverend Molly Housh Gordon. Join us for our annual Intergenerational Thanksgiving Service, when we will explore compassion and solidarity and wonder how to make room at the table for all.
The world begins at a kitchen table. No matter what, we must eat to live. The gifts of earth are brought and prepared, set on the table. So it has been since creation, and it will go on. It will go on no matter who we are or where we are, no matter even whether our feet are planted on this earth. Even if we are orbiting the earth in space, it will go on. There is a story of a group of astronauts who came back from an early visit to the International Space Station with a demand for the engineers at NASA. If we're going to spend a month at a time up there eating this horrible packaged stuff that counts for space food, said the astronauts, we need a table to sit around for our meals. The NASA engineers laughed. Can any of our kids tell me why the NASA engineers might think it was silly to put a table in space? Yeah. Exactly, because there's no gravity in space and stuff will just float around. The food wouldn't sit on the table. And even the astronauts themselves couldn't sit at the table without floating up unless they strapped themselves in. But the astronauts insisted. To feel at home in space, to feel human so far away from the earth, they needed to sit down together at a table. So the engineers designed them one, a table that folded down with Velcro on it for their food packets, and straps on the floor for their feet so they wouldn't float away. And to this day, at dinner time in space, whenever that is, astronauts from all over the world, even from countries in conflict with each other, gather at that table to share a meal and to share something of what it means to be human as they float miles above the earth. In this morning's story about Sophia and her special guest, we heard about the importance of making room to welcome others, even when they are not who we are expecting. This calling to welcome and shelter the stranger is repeated over and over again in the religions of the world. Almost every tradition has a story like the story of Sophia. Stories where God comes to visit, but in disguise, as a stranger or an outcast, to remind us of our sacred duty to open our doors and our hearts to one another as one human family. And now we learn from our astronauts about the importance of taking the time not just to let someone in, but to sit down together at a common table, to create a mutual space for comfort and nourishment and belonging where we can all be fed, where host and guest alike will give and receive in the common human experience. So I have an invitation for our kids as you listen for a few more minutes. I think Shannon has colored pencils if you still need them or you've received them. I invite you to draw on the plates that you got for our story. Draw a big feast with lots of people gathered around the table. Maybe it's a Thanksgiving feast. And I invite you to think about who would you invite to come to your feast. Maybe special family and friends that you love. But then I also invite you to think about who else you might have come to your feast who would otherwise be left out. So draw that picture of the table with everybody who you could think to invite, and then later when we have our cornbread, I'll ask you to bring your plates forward to set our table. The world begins, after all, at the kitchen table. This table has been a house in the rain, an umbrella in the sun. Wars have begun and ended at this table. It is a place to hide in the shadow of terror, a place to celebrate the terrible victory. This week, families, friends, and loved ones across the country will gather together around tables of every size and shape. They will share a Thanksgiving meal and perhaps a few words of gratitude. And this week, as we sit around our various tables, it is not clear whether the calling to hospitality and the truth of our common humanity will win the day. Last week, we gathered in this space in the shadow of terrorist attacks in Paris and Lebanon and wept at the horror and violence faced by our human family. And then we watched as terror did its work and as fear and division swept through. We saw racist backlash emerge as verbal or physical violence against Muslim people or brown people generally across our country and the world. We saw fundamentalist Christians condemning all of Islam and fundamentalist atheists condemning all of religion. We saw a rush on the part of nearly half our nation's governors to refuse the paltry 10,000 of millions of Syrian refugees seeking shelter, fleeing terror just as profound but far more sustained than that experienced by the West last week. Over and over this week, we have heard in the national dialogue, there is no room at the American table. Our safety is scarce enough as it is. Welcoming the stranger is too dangerous. It threatens what we have. Lock the doors, batten down the hatches. And though I am horrified and ashamed by this rhetoric, though I have signed the petitions to welcome more refugees, and though my heart aches for every single person forced to flee their home, leave their beloved table behind, there is still a part of me that understands the reaction of fear and defensiveness. The fear I know in my heart when I hear of violence and tragedy is real. The danger and risk of opening our doors to the stranger is also real. And if my heart is not closed to the Syrian refugee, when I'm honest with myself, I will admit that there is always somewhere a stranger or outcast to whom it is closed. I will admit that I must constantly search out my heart for the bias and prejudice planted there by fear. We must, because we cannot allow danger to be the only voice or the final one and expect to stay fully human. We must risk hospitality. We must risk love. And we know we can. Our human family in Paris and Lebanon, in Syria, on Mizzou's campus, they've shown us that in the face of oppression, in the face of terror, fear need not have the last word. Humans are capable of compassion and grace and love beyond belief. We are able to risk love, not without wisdom and caution, but with commitment, even when danger is real. This week, my colleague Victoria Weinstein observed, there's a reason that hospitality is a religious virtue and not just a thing that nice people do. It is sacrificial. Real hospitality involves risk, an opening of the door to the unknown other. Hospitality, she says, isn't just vacuuming and putting out appetizers and a smile. It's about saying, "Oh, holy Lord, I hope these people don't hurt me or take advantage of me," but our human society relies on these acts of feeding and sheltering each other. So I must be brave and unlock the door. Scary stuff, big stuff, ancient and timeless stuff, echoing of the scriptures of many traditions. You shall welcome the stranger. The world begins at a kitchen table. It is here that children are given instruction on what it means to be human. And what it means to be human is to be scared sometimes, deeply afraid. And what it means to be human is to be insecure sometimes, truly at risk. And to lose sometimes, for loss is the cost of our loving. And what it means to be human is to meet each day with courage because we must. And to let go often because life is too precious and wild to grasp for long. And to meet fear with love because there is no other way. There is no other way. What it means to be human is to sit at a common table. Because the table is what we have. Each other is what we have. At this table, we sing with joy, with sorrow. We pray of suffering and remorse. We give thanks. Perhaps the world will end at the kitchen table while we are laughing and crying, eating of the last sweet bite. And could there at last be any other way or a better end? Whether we are 220 miles above Earth with our feet strapped to the space station floor, or gathered around a Thanksgiving feast with loved ones, or huddled with a meager meal in a refugee tent, no matter who we are and where we are, we must eat to live. We must join at the common human table. So it has been since the beginning of creation, and it will go on. And so this Thanksgiving, as you sit at a table, wherever you are, I invite you to keep your heart trained on that larger banquet, that shared human table of which we are all a part. That table which challenges us to risk hospitality and calls our hearts to a deeper sense of connection with each other and with all beings, even in the depths of our fear, even in the heart of our worry or sorrow. I invite you this Thanksgiving to remember, to recall the human kin who are not at your table, and wonder how you might invite them in. Set them a place, at least in your heart. Do your small part to make this life together a feast, a bounteous table where there is a place for everyone. As we join at our tables this week, let us search our hearts for the stranger, for the outcast, even the one whom we might fear. And then let us risk welcome. Let us risk love. Because we can. Because we must. Because there is no other way. And let us sing together of the table we dream about. The welcome table open to everyone. Hymn number 407 is the welcome table. I invite you to rise in body or in spirit as you are able, and join in singing as we set our table. This Thanksgiving time, we gather at the table to remember the abundance all around us, that everything we need to be fully human and whole is right here, ready for us to share. We gather at the table to remember to set a place for the neighbor, the friend, the stranger, the outcast, that we might share our bounty of love with all our human family. We remember this in the simple, ancient, and sacred act of breaking bread together. Bread, the stuff of life, in which is gathered warm sun, rich earth, gentle rain, and human labor. Blessing this bread, let us celebrate our communion with all those who have lived upon the earth and all who live upon it still. Mysterious source of all, we thank you for the many blessings of our lives. We thank you for bountiful times and for the love that is abundant among us even in times of scarcity. Bless this bread that it may be a glad symbol and reminder of our many gifts. Bless this bread to our use in pursuit of the good, that none need hunger, that there might be a place at the table for every human soul. Bless this bread made with love and care, that it may fill our emptiness and renew our hearts. Bless this bread that it may be for all people. Bless this bread that it may sustain us in the work of love. Amen. I will invite you now to come forward and take your place at the table by taking of our cornbread communion. Kids, please bring your table pictures if you'd like to help us set the table. You can set them on the table when the time comes. I'm going to ask you to come up the two side aisles. Jamila and I will be ready with bread at either side. We have lots of corn muffins. We have gluten-free corn muffins. And we have gluten-free, corn-free rice crackers. There is a place at everyone, I hope, for our table. If you prefer not to consume bread or cracker, you may simply receive a blessing, or if you prefer to remain seated, you may enjoy a time of music and meditation. And I ask if you have a neighbor who might need help, please offer to bring them a muffin or a cracker and a blessing. And so now, come to the table.